Hi and welcome back to this beginner's tutorial series for Blender. In this episode we're going to be looking at doing all the interesting stuff. We're going to start off by looking at the edit mode workspace, and then we'll be getting into the actual modelling. We'll be creating the little car scene that we saw in the introductory video. We'll start off by modelling the car body, then we'll add some wheels as separate objects, and then we'll create the ground and some trees to use as particles later. Using these tools you'll be able to get quickly into 3D modelling. So let's get a quick look into the video. In this video what I'm going to do is concentrate more on getting you up to speed with the keyboard shortcuts, and to do that I'm going to bring up my panel and give you a screen display. We'll be looking more at the keyboard shortcuts to familiarise you with those. So keep an eye on this little corner of the screen and it'll tell you the keys. Actually, I think I'll just increase the mouse icon just so you can see the keys a bit better. It'll display the buttons that I press, whether it's the left, right, or middle mouse button, and the keyboard shortcuts will appear next to it. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's take a look at the editing mode, and we do that by selecting this menu down here on the bottom menu bar. Click that and just select edit mode, or alternatively you can use the tab key to jump between object mode and edit mode. And the first thing you'll see is the cube has become illuminated on its edges, and what we have is a little square on each intersection between these edges, and those are the vertices that we can grab and manipulate to change the shape of the mesh. This whole object is referred to as a mesh. The faces are often referred to as polygons. That's really all you need to know. To switch between selecting a vertex, an edge or a face, we use this little trio of icons at the bottom. So it's by default it's on vertex select, which allows you just to select individual points. The middle one is the edge select, which allows you to select whole edges. And finally there's the face select, which allows you to select an individual face. You can also hold down the shift key to select multiple faces. As you can see, by holding the shift key and pressing the right mouse button you can make selections. Simply, I've switched to edge select, simply selecting with the right mouse button just selects an individual option. It selects an individual piece of the mesh that you have selected. There are further options that we can use, and we'll go into those as we get modelling. Okay, let's change our view. We're currently in perspective mode, which gives us that sense of depth in our scene. Objects further away will appear smaller and objects closer up will appear larger, but for modelling purposes we just want a nice flat object to work with, and we do that by pressing 5 on our number pad, and we are shifted into orthographic view. So now objects will appear to be the same size no matter how far they are from each other. which is good for modelling, but not so good for setting up the scene. What next? Yeah, our other keyboard shortcuts are for the viewer the same as in object mode. If we press 1, we are put into front view, 3 we are put into right view, and 7 we are put into top view. We're just going to go back into right view, and if we look closely at the background of our cube, you can see a series of grid markings, and each marking is one Blender unit, which is the equivalent of 1 meter in real world space. If we zoom in further, we can see each Blender unit is subdivided into smaller units, and there are 10 smaller units to a single Blender unit, and we can use that when modelling to tell Blender exactly where we want to place our faces. And we do that just by typing in the command to move, and then typing in the number of increments with which we would like to move. Okay, so let's get on to the exciting bit now and start turning this cube into a model car. If we press A on our keyboard, that is our deselect button, and it is also our select all button. So by pressing it again, our entire cube is selected, and whilst in side view, so to move an object we press G, and that's our grab key, and then we can tell it which direction to move in by pressing the axis button. So we want it to move up, so we press Z, and now our blue line is illuminated, and we can slide our cube up and down manually, or like I said, we can type in a value and it will move the cube that amount. So if I type in 1 for the amount of Blender units, you'll see the cube immediately jump to the floor level, and then if I type in 0.3 for the increment level, and then I press my left mouse button, and that locks it into place. So now if we take a look at our background grid, we can see the base of the cube is 1, 2, 3 points above this center line. It's also 3 points above the object origin now. So we'll keep that in mind, but it's not important at the moment. What we want to do now is create the bodywork for our car out of this cube. And to do that, first thing we're going to do is, I'm using my middle mouse button, and I'm just going to tilt my screen, and then I can right click the top face. Then I can go back into side view. To create the bodywork of the car, I'm going to shrink the size of the cube down to half its length, half its height rather. And to do that, I just simply press G, Z and 1, and you'll see it's increased its size, and that's not what I want to do. So if I simply press the negative button on my top row of keys, then will invert that value into a negative value. Now I can extrude up this center part by pressing E. So as you can see, when we press the extrude button, we have by default, we are just simply constrained to the Z axis, so we can press 1 on our number pad, and with our left mouse button select, and that looks good. Now I want to bring out the bodywork for the actual car, and If I extrude again, it will maintain the shape of the top faces, but if I pull the faces out, it will pull the bottom edge of this top face, so that this top face then develops an angle, and I'll show you that by just making that face available by rotating the screen. Select the face, go back into side view, and if I just grab it again with my G key, G to grab, and if I press Y, I get my constraint, and if I pull my face, you can see the topmost faces are being pulled out along that angle. So if I type -1, that gives us the right space there. And now I want to pull out the bonnet of the car, and I do that with an extrusion, so E, Y, and we don't want to go a whole blender unit this time, so we'll simply press 0.8 on our number pad, remembering we're going in the negative direction, so we press the negative button and press to select, and you'll notice the edge is just short of the full blender unit, and if we scroll into view slightly, you'll notice that we are 2 points away from the edge, because we've travelled 8 blender units outwards. And now we take on the back face. Just select that with our with our right mouse button, back into side view, and we'll extrude the boot of the car one whole unit. So E, Y, 1, left mouse button to commit, and very quickly you can start to see that the basic shape is coming together. We have the front windscreen, the car door body shape, and the rear window of the car, and also the boot of the car. We're going to make this into a little saloon, so a straight backed vehicle is not the best, so we're going to switch to edge select mode. Just tilt around slightly and just right mouse button on the top edge of the car, press 3 again, and G, Y, and we'll just pull slightly, not too much. We don't want it at the same angle as the front because that would look a little bit funny, so we'll put it just about there. I think that looks okay. And that is the base model of our vehicle. Of course, we want to have windows and doors and things in the car, so we will do that firstly by creating a loop around the car, and then extruding inwards along the mesh, and then creating the indents by extruding the faces in. So first thing we need to do is cut a line down the middle of the car, and we do that by pressing Ctrl R, and you'll see immediately a pink line appears, and if I move my mouse into different parts, that pink line moves to where it thinks it will be in the best position for where our mouse is hovering. But we want it in down the middle of the car, like so. So we will left mouse button to confirm that, and now you'll notice if we move our mouse, we can slide that loop into a different position. We want it in the center, so if I just right mouse button, that'll just commit it to that position. But I actually want it to be straightened up, so I'm going to use my scale tool by pressing S, and now I can scale along the y-axis and use that y constraint to straighten the line, and I do that by pressing S, Y, and then hitting 0, and that brings it into a nice straight line. Now, to get the doors and windows, what I want to do is to go into face select mode again. I'm going to select the door on the front, and I want to create an edge around the door frame, and I want to create the central pillar in the middle of the actual vehicle. And to do that, I need to inset these faces, and to inset the faces I press I, and then I, just using my eyes as reference, I can push that those faces in towards the center of each other, and I can choose how much of that I have as my door frame, and that looks good to me from this position. I will now do the same on the rear window. Simply press I to inset, move the mouse so that the border becomes the size that looks good, and then I can press left mouse to set that in place. And now you can see we have the central pillar for the windows, and we have the frame for the actual car body. And if I now select the two windows, and if I scroll in and just put my scene on an angle by rotating around it with the middle mouse button, I now press E, X, and I just want to drag the windows slightly in. And what that does, that is when light hits the object, it'll create shadows in these little shallow grooves, and it'll look like the door is the windows are actually a separate thing from the actual car body. And we'll do the same to create the doors, except we'll pull them out this time. So I select one face, hold down Shift, select the next face, press E to extrude, X to keep it on the X axis, and just drag it out ever so slightly to create the door. And that looks good. So I'll left mouse button to commit. Now we do exactly the same for the front window. Right mouse button to select, I to inset the face, move the mouse to create the size of the inset, press left mouse button to set, right mouse button to select the middle face again, and now if I rotate around slightly, we need to move this window down at an angle, and if we press E, as before, we get that blue line, and that blue line is constrained to the face normal rather than a direction X, Y or Z, and that allows us then to move a face in the direction that it is actually pointing. So if we move that down slightly, just enough to give us a little bit of light, and we press the left mouse button to commit, we have our car body finished. We can just take a little look at that by pressing 0, and that puts us into our camera view. This is the scene as it will be seen in the render, and we can render a scene by pressing F12, and there you can see our little car. It has its windows, it has its doors, and it has its little windscreen, and that's great, but the one thing it's missing are its wheels, so we'll get on and start those right now. I need to change back to my 3D viewport window, and I do that with this little drop down menu here. I'll just press it, select 3D view from the menu, and we're back where we were. Now I want to press 3. Now I need to add a new mesh to create the wheels, and I want to do that in object mode. So I go down to the little drop down menu here, select object mode, and that takes us back out here. And now if I go to the add menu along the top bar, click it, select mesh, and from the sub menu select circle. That puts a circle in our scene. If I rotate my view around the mouse, you will see that the new object is a circle. Press 3 again, and if we look in this panel on the left hand toolbar, you'll see it says add circle, and then it gives us a list of options, and one of the options, the very top option, is the amount of vertices in our circle, and for this scene 32 is a very high number, so we'll drop that down by clicking on the number with our left mouse button. We'll type 12 and press enter, and that gives us 12 vertices on our circle. Fill type is nothing. Radius we will adjust in edit mode. Align to view we will also change that in edit mode, and location and rotation will all be done in edit mode. So we'll jump over to edit mode. Now we take our circle, which is already selected by default, and we haven't done anything to change that, so we can simply rotate it to face the direction that we want it in, which is aligned to the car. So if I press R to rotate, and then I type 90 and press enter, nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens is because we have face selected, and if we just look at our circle, there are no faces to act upon, so it couldn't fulfill the command to rotate. So we change it to either edge select or vertex select. Either one of those will be fine. Press 3 once again. Now we try again, press R, and we want it to rotate along the green line, so we press Y, and then we type in the amount of rotation, which is 90 degrees, and that brings it so that it's facing the right direction. Now we need to have the circle in the wheel position, so we shall use our manipulator, drag it into place. That looks about right. Obviously it's far too big, so we will scale it down by pressing S, and using the mouse we will push on that little black and white line, which scales down our wheel, and we'll just eyeball it again until it looks about right for the car that we're drawing. Now if I scroll in and I grab the manipulator, I can drag it up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, and that has the wheel in the position that we want it. Now we need it on the side of the car, so if I press 1, you'll see it is in the middle. So if we get a little bit closer this time and we actually eyeball it properly, and we bring our wheel out to there, that looks good. And now if we make our wheel 3 increments wide, that should be a good size for a wheel. So I will press E, X, 0.3, and that will bring us out just enough to create the wheel, and then left mouse button to commit, and now we see we have our little wheel there. What we can do now is we need to fill in the wheel, and we want to make it look a little bit more wheel-like than just a flat cylinder. So with this loop of vertices connected and lit up, we press E and then immediately press S to scale, and we can just push in the inner faces until we get the size that looks about right for our tyres. That looks a good tyre size. And now we want to create a rim for our wheel, so we'll press E again to extrude, X, and just a tiny slight amount, just to give us a little bit of shadow for the rim. Press E again, S to scale, pull it in, E, X, and make that lip, E, S, and just push it in again, E, S, push it in, and then finally E, and then click the right mouse button, and what we have there, we have this loop sitting on top of the previous loop, so we've basically got a duplicate loop connected to the loop underneath, and that's not a good thing to have, but I'm just warning you so you don't go off and do something else. We're going to merge that loop in the center, and we can use the toolbar. Let me just move the operator panel down a little bit. In our toolbar on the side we have the merge option, and if we click that from the drop down menu, we select at center, and it takes all that duplicated set of vertices and merges it at that central point. Fabulous. Now if we just rotate around to the opposite side of the wheel, we'll see that the back of the wheel is empty, which wouldn't matter too much, but we're going to duplicate this wheel and you'll be able to see it from the other side of the car, so we would like to fill that in. I can hover my mouse over the edge of the mesh, hold down Alt and right select, and that selects the entire loop of vertices in one go, and that just makes selecting easy. I can now extrude those faces inwards by pressing E and S as we did before. Move them in. We don't need to make a rim on this one because it will be behind the car and mostly hidden. E, left click, merge at center, and that gives us a nice closed mesh. Now if we go back to front view by pressing 1 on our number keypad, we'll see that we have one wheel on its own, not really doing much to help with driving the car. So what we need to do is recreate that wheel on the opposite side, and we can try modelling it and trying to get the dimensions exact, or we can use what is referred to as a modifier, and the modifiers are in the panel of tabs on our right hand side, and currently it's set to the render tab, which is what all these bits of information are for, but we want to just roll back with the middle mouse button until we get this spanner icon, and if we simply left click that, it brings up this button that says add modifier. Click that and it brings this sub menu which tells us all the modifiers that we can use for this particular scene. And if I scroll down, what I'm looking for is the mirror modifier. If I press it, you can see immediately we get this data box, and the axis of mirroring is the x-axis, and as you can see along the x-axis we have been given an extra wheel. So that was easy, but now we need to create the back wheels. If we simply tell it to mirror along the y-axis as well as the x, our wheels are in an awkward position. We don't want the wheels in an awkward position, so we will use a different modifier to create those wheels, and we will just go up and press add modifier again, and this time we will choose array, and immediately the array modifier puts a count of 2, which is 1 and 2. Now if I just pull out this window slightly by hovering over the middle space between the two windows, if I pull that out slightly, you can see the relative offset is set to 1 along the x-axis, and we don't want that, we want it on the y-axis, so we'll click the 1 on the x and type in 0. What we want is to have the wheels along the y-axis, so we will select that, type 1, and as you can see the wheels have been duplicated in the y-axis. Again, they're in slightly the wrong place, so we have to fix that, and we simply do that by holding down the left mouse button over the numerical value and slide it gently until it's approximately in position. I'm going to press 3 on my number pad just to go into side view. I'm now going to use the little arrows just to get a bit more position and press them 1, 2 times, and that looks okay to me. Yep, that looks fine. And that is it. That is our car finished. You can of course add more details in if you wish. You can lower the bodywork. You can select the front face and make it a bit more sloped like the sides. You can play around with the modifiers if you wish on the actual car itself. But for the basics of this tutorial, that is it for the car. What we now need is the ground and the background trees. So let's head back to object mode by pressing tab, and we will add a new object, but I first want my 3D cursor appears to have moved. So what we want to do is press Shift S and we get the snapping menu, and we want cursor to center, and that just puts it in the middle again. Now we're going to the add menu, add mesh cylinder, And again, we have got too many vertices in our properties panel, so we will reduce those to, we'll have 18 this time. The radius, I'm going to adjust the radius from 1 to 53. And I'm going to change the depth from 2 to 100. And now I'm going to click Align to View. We don't need any filling, so if we just click nothing, we get a hollow tube, and we see we have a huge cylinder that will act as our floor space. Now, while still in object mode, I'm going to press 3. Why is that slightly weirdly rotated? That should be at 90. Okay, that was weird. I don't know why it did that. Okay, so now if we drag down with the Z widget and we scroll in a bit, we can see we're just about on the side of the mesh edge, but we're still a little bit far away. So what I want to do now, I just want to go back to edit mode, and I need to adjust this mesh so that the wheels of the car sit nicely on top of it. Because at the moment, if I press R to rotate, X to constrain to the X-axis, when we rotate the mesh, you'll see that it cuts through the wheels of the car and it floats away as the peaks and flats of the that make up the cylinder come and go. I'll just show you again. See how it flattens off and it's miles away. And if we were to raise the cylinder up, these central points would be higher up in the car, and that would be completely rubbish. So what we need to do is smooth out the mesh, and we do that with another modifier. Remember, we're on the spanner, add modifier, and we want this one at the bottom, which is a subdivision surface. We'll just simply press that. It brings up our subdivision menu. You can see immediately we had a little bit of a change on the mesh. If we press to increase the number of subdivisions from 1 to 2, you can see as I move the mesh into a viewable position, the curve of the mesh has shrunk down to a more cylindrical shape, and it is no longer as filling up these sharp edges. And now if we go to our toolbar and just scroll it down slightly, we want this shading smooth, and that's that done. Now if we jump back to object mode and press 3, we can drag the cylinder up to the wheels of the car, G, Z, and just drag it up. And if we take a look now, we can see better that the cylinder is much closer to being touching the wheels as a floor should. So if I use my middle mouse button just to scroll out, you can see that better from the scene, and that is our scene modelled. We have our car and our road surface, and what all we need now is the trees to sit along the outside of the cylinder, so when it rotates the trees appear to go past the camera and it looks like the car's driving. But to do that, we're not going to simply model hundreds and hundreds of trees. We're going to use a particle system, and in order to do that we need something for the particles to be. So if we go into object mode, if we press on this little square down here, these are our layers, and we have chosen the furthest layer from any of the action, and we'll use this to hide a couple of little trees. And our little trees are just going to be simply a mesh object, a cone. We're going to move that cone up in edit mode now. We will press 3 to go into side view, type G, Z 2, so it jumps up 2 squares. Now underneath the mesh, if we just rotate around slightly, we'll see we have that flat face again, and we don't want that. We will select it, we will press X, and from the menu we will choose delete faces. Now we'll choose the vertex select mode, press down Alt, right click along the bottom edge, and we'll select all those vertices, press E, S, and scale them in. Again, E, S, scale them in again, scale them in. Now we're going to side view again. We'll press E, and this time we will press Z, and we'll drag down that centre to be the trunks of our little trees. And now that's a little bit stubby for my liking, so I'm going to select the top vertex. I'm going to grab it with the Z constraint, drag it up so it's a little bit more fir tree shaped, and release to have that. Now that's our first tree. And for a little bit of variety, what we can do is add another tree, but this time we will use a mesh UV sphere, which is just a ball made of meshes. And this one's a little bit heavy on the polygons, so in the options menu we will select that and type 16, and for rings we will choose 8, and that just makes it a little bit less dense. Now we can move it up by pressing G, Z, 2. Oh dear, I've actually made a mistake and modelled it in the same object as the previous tree. We wanted it as a separate object, but that's not a problem. What I can do is simply select a bit of the pine tree, press L to select all the linked vertices for that pine tree, and I can hide them by pressing H. And now I can continue modelling my little tree here, and to do that I'm going to select the bottom vertex, press X, and this time I'm going to choose vertices from the delete menu. Now I press Alt and select that ring, press to go into side menu. I want to actually scale it in a little bit to make the tree, otherwise the trunk's going to be really quite thick for this tree. So I'll scale it by pressing ES. I'll push that in just a little bit and use the widget just to drag it down just a tiny touch. And now I'm going to extrude the trunk by pressing EZ. I'll pull that down to the ground level, and that's our little round tree. If I now press A to select all of that, and press shading smooth, it all goes really nice. And now we can bring back our pine tree by pressing Alt H, and that just reveals it again. And now I want this tree to be a separate object from the round tree, so if I select one vertex, press L to select all the linked vertexes, and this time I'm going to press P, separate selection, and now that's made that into its own separate object, which we can access in object mode. And with it selected, we'll go scroll up and select shading smooth. Now that's all selected, and you can see both objects are selected together. One has a nice dark orange border around it, and the round tree has a yellowy border around it, which means the round tree is active. It's the main object in the scene. I think we discussed this in our last video, but nonetheless. But in order to use these in the particle system, we're going to turn them into a group, and because they're both selected already, we will press Ctrl G, and now you'll see they've turned green. That means they've been grouped together, and we're going to name the group. By default it's just named group. We're going to name it trees. Not trees. You can leave it as trees, we all know what it means, but we're going to call it trees for the purposes of tutorials and not confusing regular people. Press enter to confirm, and that is it. Actually, that's not it, because on our menu we seem to have our disk, our road plane, on a separate layer to our car layer, and I don't want that. I want them on the same layer, so I'm going to choose the layer that has my road, select the road, press M to bring up my move to layers panel, and I'm going to click on the same layer as the car. We see here and here, so if I press that button, now the object's moved from this layer into this one, and we can see that here this layer is now empty, and if we press on the first layer, it's in our scene, which is what I want. Keep everything together unless there's a reason for it to be on a different layer. And that is everything for this tutorial. We have our car modelled, we have its wheels modelled, we have a road plane, and we have some trees hidden away on the last layer. And if we just render that now by pressing F12, we'll see we have our little car, it's on the road, and there's no trees in sight, and there's no background, and that's absolutely everything we need. When you've got this far in your scene, take a little screenshot like this by pressing F12, go to image, save as image, give you a piece of a name and a folder to stick it in. You might want to put it in your My Pictures folder, or create a separate folder on your desktop just for your tutorial project. But give it a name, save it either as a PNG from this little menu or as a JPEG, whichever's best for you, and then stick it on our Facebook page and let us know how you've got on. And the links for our Facebook and Google Plus are in the link in the description on YouTube as always. So in our next tutorial we will move on to creating the textures and materials for the road, the plane and the trees and the car. We'll have some nice colourful bodywork. We'll have a reflective material for the windows, and we will show you how to use image textures to transfer images to objects. We'll show you how to use multiple textures on an object, so you can have either an image texture and a regular texture, and you'll be able to have different coloured textures on one model. You have a reflective texture and a non-reflective texture, and we'll mix it up and we'll play a little with them, but we'll keep it simple, and we'll hopefully give you a little bit of understanding of what needs to be done to make really simple but effective renders. Until then, save your scene, and to do that, press the File, Save As, select the top bar, type in the title for your saved project, and I'm going to simply call this Modeling Tutorial Part 3, and save as Blender file. And now you can open this file at any time, tweak it and play with it, and have a go and see what you can figure out for yourselves. And until next time, we will look forward to seeing your works up till now. Take care now, see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe. You can leave us a comment in the section below, and keep in touch with us on Facebook, Twitter and Google Plus. Love to hear from you, and we'll see you in the next video.